Hi, good evening. So welcome to the first of the Economy and Sustainability Scrutiny panel. So just to kick off with sort of apologies, we've got apologies from Councillor Johnson, and we have one or two councillors joining online. So we've got Councillor Midder, and there was Councillor Sistemos, but I think she's dropped off again now. Is anyone aware of any other apologies? If anyone else is coming? No. Great. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. Matters considered in private, there aren't none, though we do have some gold papers as part of the presentation. So if anyone, these are more for information, but if anyone did have a question in relation to those later, please obviously sort of acknowledge that you want to ask something on those so that we can pause the video for that. Item 4, declarations of interest. Is there anything that anyone wants to declare above what they've already declared on their council declaration forms? No. So that takes us to item 5, which is the panel operation, so the terms of reference and the outline work programme. So we've got in the pack, we've got the terms of reference, which basically outlines the terms of the panel. So the scope of the panel is essentially to scrutinise matters relating to the local economy and environmental sustainability. It just outlines our schedule of the meetings, external involvement, which we'll come to in the next appendix, and relations to sort of the key stakeholders and which portfolios it sits under. Did anyone have any comments on the terms of reference at all? No? Great, thank you. So I think we need to formally agree that, don't we? So everyone happy with that? Yep, great. The next one is Appendix 2, which is the framework for nominations and appointments and retention of non-voting advisory members to the scrutiny panel. Now, in particular, in relation to the scrutiny panel, we were looking to co-opt 2 individuals. So the first was someone from the Ealing bid, from a local sort of economic perspective. Unfortunately, we've not been able to we've not had any response from Ealing bid. We've chased them as well in terms of whether they wanted to join the panel. We're going to explore some other options between now and the next meeting. So potentially maybe the chair of one of the other bids in the borough, and also one of the chairs of the acting bid suggested potentially someone who's also a lecturer at the University of West London on business. So that might give us a different perspective. So we'll explore those and see if any of those potentially would be interested in joining. And then what we can do is, depending how those conversations go, we can let the panel know between now and October. The second co-optee, we want to have someone who could look at this from an equalities perspective. So Peter has contacted the council's equalities team to sort of have a look if there are any particular names or individuals who would be appropriate or might be interested in joining the panel as the second co-optee. We've not had any sort of names come forward yet, but that's something we're going to continue to pursue ahead of the next meeting. Obviously, if anyone else, any other members had any other suggestions, either now or sort of in the weeks to come, just let us know, because obviously we're open to sort of any suggestions and who else may want to join. Does anyone have anything they want to mention on Appendix 2 and on co-option at all? No? Okay. And then Appendix 3 was the work programme. So I know a number of you were on the call that we had a few weeks ago, where we sort of had an initial sort of discussion about what we wanted the panel to cover, and how we've essentially looked at breaking it down over the 4 meetings is have an initial meeting, which is sort of an overview of the directorate, and then each of the subsequent meetings sort of taking a particular theme from the directorate and looking at it in more detail. So the second meeting in terms of housing delivery, the third meeting on sustainability and climate action, and the fourth on Ealing's economic growth. And that sort of hangs around some of the council's key objectives in terms of the housing targets, in terms of climate action, in terms of working towards net zero, and economic growth in terms of creating I think it's 10,000 new jobs in the borough. So in terms of how we can scrutinise each of those meetings, sort of hangs around a particular theme. What I thought might be helpful is that if we go back to the work programme at the end of the meeting, once we've heard the initial presentation, Because what we may get some ideas of what else and specifics we might want to cover in each of those at the end. So I propose that we pause on that and we discuss it at the end of the meeting once we've heard the presentation. Excellent. Right, so that takes us through to the substantive item this evening, which is the sort of directorate overview. We've got a number of officers here and I think one online. So I just wondered whether maybe it might be useful for the three officers to introduce themselves and then sort of work into the presentation. Peter.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So Peter George, the Council's Strategic Director for Economy and Sustainability, about 2.5 months in to the job now. So really happy to be here and to meet you all.
Good evening, I'm Adam Wally. I'm Assistant Director for Major Projects. I'm a member of Peter's team.
Yes, good evening, Chris Bunting, Assistant Director for Leisure Services.
I think we've got one officer online. I think two. We've got Connor McDonough, who's the Assistant Director of Economic Growth, and Philip Brownlee, Director of Housing Development. Thank you.
We've got a really comprehensive pack of slides for you. We've deliberately put together a comprehensive deck. So you've got a complete overview of the totality of the Economy and Sustainability Directorate. So I'm hoping you've had an opportunity to have a bit of a look through before. We wanted to provide that information as we think it helps to really set the scene and provide a kind of a knowledge foundation for the future thematic sessions that we'll be presenting to you in the coming months. With this particular slide deck, we've highlighted with an asterisk that the slides that we will be talking you through, but we are of course happy to answer questions related to any of the slides. So I'm going to start off and then Adam is going to talk through some of the major projects. So the good news is this slide's already out of date, and the reason why it's out of date is this week Nikki Fiedler joined the council, completing the permanent lineup for the council senior leadership team. So Nikki replaces Darren as the Strategic Director for Housing and Environment. But you can see there, after months of recruitment, the Chief Exec's now got a settled management team. And the next slide shows how the Economy and Sustainability Directorate breaks down. We've got a number of the direct reports here today in terms of number of the assistant directors. We do actually have an interim covering the planning and sustainability role, and I'm pleased to confirm that we have today started the recruitment to having a permanent assistant director for what we're now calling the Planning, Design and Sustainability Department. So we're really hopeful that we'll attract some really good caliber candidates for that role. What we wanted to highlight with this slide is members will be familiar with these three overarching themes in the council plan. What we wanted to highlight is the major role that the Economy and Sustainability Directorate is going to be playing in terms of delivering these goals. We very much see ourselves as having a major role in delivering all three. And as it's already been kind of mentioned, I am the Strategic Director responsible for climate change and this is also the directorate responsible for kind of delivering that manifesto pledge of 10,000 quality jobs. But we see tackling inequality as a thread that cuts across all of the work that we do. And you can see here with the numbers at the bottom in terms of the proportion of the deliverables responsible within this directorate. Next couple of slides, I can take zero credit for, which is the performance of the directorate to date, showing a really good start to this administrative terms in terms of actions completed and kind of actions on track. And I think with the next slide, we've got some highlights from the year before that we wanted just to draw to your attention. I think the first one, which Chris's team has led, is around the planting of trees, as well as Chris leading that sports facility strategy, which we're now kind of actively discussing about how we implement all of the proposals within that strategy. I recently visited the Dormers World Leisure Centre, and that the women's section of that leisure centre in particular is going really well. It's been really well used by local women in the area, and the feedback that Chris's team's received has been really positive. So we're really happy about that. In terms of jobs, we've got a stretching target for new jobs, but the team did really well with what they was able to achieve last year in terms of the number of jobs and apprenticeships created. The creative enterprise zone and the cultural manifesto, we view those as kind of something to really build upon. So with the cultural manifesto, that really highlighted the council's vision around citizens within the borough having an active role in culture. And I think we've got a great record in terms of delivering and organising grassroots culture. And we're now having conversations around how we can build upon the grassroots with other kind of cultural venues. I think other ones would highlight the Let's Go Southall work has been really successful, and we see that as something, as an approach that could potentially be quite pioneering for the council and the borough. Members will be aware of the cabinet report approval for Gurnell Leisure Centre, and Adam will talk a little bit more about how we're already kind of starting to take that project forward in order to deliver new facilities in that part of the borough. Clearly, one of the biggest targets for us is the delivery of those 4,000 generally affordable homes, and the team made a good start with what was delivered last year. We're doing a lot of work this year on how we can build upon that. I think it is worth noting that it continues to be quite a hostile environment for delivering homes at the moment. We're still suffering from inflationary pressures, high interest rates. There's a situation where a lot of the housing associations are not able to develop new homes because they're having to invest in their own stock. They're having to respond to fire safety works arising from Grenfell. They're having to address damp and mold. They're having to respond to climate change and the retrofit agenda. So there's quite hostile conditions. members will also be aware of the risk and issues around tall buildings being subject to double staircasing, which someone was estimating to me earlier that they think could impact currently around 100,000 properties, across London and beyond. So it's a difficult environment, but that doesn't detract from the fact that there continues to be a housing crisis. And in particular, over the last year or so, there's been real pressures in the private rental market, as well as the need for affordable housing. So the need to build is greater than ever, and we're doing a lot of work on how we can improve upon that target. So I think at that point, we drop down to the directorate governance arrangement. So in terms of kind of what I've been focused on in the first 10 weeks or so that I've been here, it has been getting the right people in place, and we had a number of key roles that are vacant, and I just mentioned one that we're now recruiting to. We're also there's 2 or 3 other major roles that we're in the process of recruiting to as well. It was about getting the structures right, and I've made some changes to the structures already. So, for example, I brought together regeneration, economic development, and employment and skills. So it's all a single department now. We previously had employment and skills separate from economic development. I felt that there was real synergies to join up the two. So that is now in one place under Connor. We've also created this new department of planning, design, and sustainability, and that department will also include a new design, urban design team, and reinvestment in conservation officers as well. So it's been about people, it's been about structure, it's been about getting the right culture in place. And I've been the first strategic director to actually issue a mandate in terms of getting people back into the office on a more regular basis. So as of next week, the whole of the directorate will be in Percival House at least 2 days a week. We've been trialing 1 day a week every Thursday, and it's been really well received. And I think all of us have seen improved levels of not only collaboration, but also it's actually been a boost to morale, because there wasn't a reason to come in before, because it was a very lonely place. But knowing that the whole of the directorate are all on the same floor every Thursday gives people a reason to come in. And that some people are meeting each other for the first time since the pandemic. But it's really fostered a sense of collaboration. So one of my early emphasis has been about culture and collaboration, but the final one is about getting the governance in place, which is what this slide's about. We've done a complete review of governance in the directorate, and we counted, I think there was about 54 meetings going on. And where those meetings reported to was, to be polite, disorganized. So we've done a complete overhaul and a complete tidy up. What we now have are 3 meetings that sit across the directorate, which I chair all of them. So we have one focused on the major projects, which is all of the schools, the leisure, new parks. We have a second one, which also covers the refurbishment of Percival House. We have a second one focused on housing delivery. So it's not just about delivering those 4,000 homes. It also covers kind of housing strategy, housing funding, strategic relationships with the GLA. And the third one is kind of a new concept. It's the placemaking board. So the purpose of the placemaking board is to think about growth through the lens of place. So what I mean by that is, take Southall. the growth in Southall is predominantly kind of led by the private sector or RPs. The council's council-led growth is only a smaller element. So we can't simply focus on what we are doing within a particular town centre. Otherwise, we will miss the majority of what's actually happening within that town centre. So the purpose of that board is partly to think about each of the 7 towns, take a strategic planning-led approach to growth. Each of them will have their own spatial plan in the local plan, and we're going to be able to use that to coordinate growth and make sure that we've make sure we've got the right levels of infrastructure to support housing and employment-led growth. So we've got the right amount of school places, nurseries, health, etc., to support the growth. That meeting is also monitors progress across the local plan, as well as the work we're doing on delivering those 10,000 jobs. So they are the 3 meetings that cover the directorate. There are meetings that sit below those. The other meeting that I've established, which is a council-wide meeting, which I also chair, is a climate leadership board. So the only way in which we're going to be able to make serious progress towards implementing that climate change strategy is if we're operating as one council, which requires a single board to coordinate activity. We've got that in place now, and it's really helping to galvanise the effort across the council. So I think now we move down to the projects.
I'm going to take over at this point. So I've just a reminder again, I'm Adam Wally, I'm Assistant Director for Major Projects. So I report the pieces, the slide that was just up on governance had the Major Projects Board, and that's obviously a major new group that I report into. In the long form version of these slides that you've had circulated is a description of all the services, and there's details on my service area and Chris's and colleagues on the call. So but as a quick overview, I manage a team of multidisciplinary team of project managers and architects and other sort of building delivery sort of specialisms that oversee a program of major projects. So my services area is predominantly in non-housing based major projects. We've got Philip, who's dialed in, who leads the housing side of things. So we oversee a big sort of program of across the board, and really any major built scheme that's required in the borough that is largely delivered by the council. So as Peter's mentioned, schools is probably the largest area of work that we work in across the team. But we also have responsibility for delivering a number of very large, high profile, important projects to the council. So I've produced three of those projects, just sort of a quick overview of each of those, but obviously happy to go into further detail on any of these projects or anything else you want to ask about. So the first of those is Percival House, and I'm sure everyone will be aware of the position with Percival House and the fact that the council has relatively recently made the decision to abandon the previous scheme to demolish the building as part of a sort of a redevelopment of the whole site, and which would have brought about a different approach. So I think following, partly I think driven by the changing circumstances and COVID, etc. I think the whole project was reevaluated and decision was reached to retain the building. So we're now on a sort of a new journey, a very sort of exciting and ambitious approach to look at refurbishing and retaining that building, and sort of focusing on how Percival House can sort of best meet the council's needs sort of going forward, particularly post-COVID. So noting, as Peter's mentioned, about working arrangements, how much the staff are going to be in the office, etc. So we're really re-establishing the project on that sort of basis and pulling together a brief. The slide that I've got showing here gives a few of the kind of key areas that we're looking at. So there's a staff engagement exercise has been launched called Ealing Experience. I don't know, for those of you that have been in Percival House regularly will have seen on the 5th floor there's a some sort of trial furniture that staff are being encouraged to go and look at and use and give feedback on. So there's a big exercise going on around that, and as part of that exercise we'll be looking to generate a sort of a brief for what the council's office requirements are. We're looking at other uses of the building, so particularly public facing facilities. There's various ideas. Nothing's yet been sort of finalised, but there's various ideas and being thought of for how the ground floor could be used differently. And we're also considering options around potentially leasing parts of the building, if it's deemed that that we don't need the full Percival House building for sort of core council requirements. So I'm overseeing that project, but actually although it sits within Peter's directorate, it's actually very much as you can probably imagine, a very cross-council project, working with colleagues in across all the directorates really, but resources, corporate resources, and strategy and change being two. So we're very much working as a group, and I'm sort of leading sort of a number of work streams in this area to bring together a sort of business case for the project, which I'm looking to bring to cabinet. We're currently aiming to be able to do that towards the end of this year. If not, well, I'm hoping to be able to bring it at some stage during the autumn to cabinet. So that's a quick overview of Percival House. Next scheme, which again Peter's touched on earlier, is Gurnell. I recognise a number of people in the room who will be fairly familiar with this project. It went to cabinet in February, and I think a number of people in the room were also at the overview and scrutiny committee when this scheme came up. So but I'll briefly talk about it as though you don't necessarily know too much of the background. So it's a replacement of Gurnell Leisure Centre just off Ruislip Road in Pitshanger Ward. And again, many of you probably know the background. The building's been flagged for replacement for quite a number of years. There was a previous scheme that didn't achieve planning permission, and has led us to a sort of a fresh think on the project. There was a feasibility study that was carried out over the course of, or was generated and developed over the course of last year, which was that work was progressed alongside a community sounding board that was set up to engage with sort of local interested stakeholders in the project, and that culminated in the cabinet report that was approved in February. And the key sort of headlines that came from that report were that the existing building, one of the things that was looked at in the scope of the feasibility study was whether similar to Percival House really, whether the leisure centre could be refurbished and continue to have a life in its existing building. And there's an image in the bottom of the slide there, but the ultimate conclusion of that exercise was that the building was at end of life and it was not economically sort of viable to refurbish that building. So that was one of the key decisions that cabinet took in February, which was helpful in terms of getting a clear direction on the basis to take the project forward. So we now have a mandate from cabinet to progress with a planning application for a full new build replacement of Gurnell, which is to be supported by some level of enabling housing development. So the next kind of major step in that project we expect will be a planning application, which is currently anticipated for early in the new year. So we've procured a design team that will take that scheme forward. There'll continue to be further community sounding board sessions over the course of this year to engage with the same stakeholders and interested local people. As I say, with a view to providing a sort of state-of-the-art new build leisure centre for residents. So again, a really interesting project, which I'm pleased to be involved with. Chris sat next to me can obviously talk to the leisure aspects of that project as well, and we work very closely alongside other colleagues in the directorate on the project. And the last of the three that I wanted to highlight was the proposed new Lido project. So this was a commitment in the manifesto, which is translated through to the council plan. So is a deliverable within that document. So this is a project very much at sort of at early stages, but we've commissioned a feasibility study to look at options for providing an outdoor swimming facility in the borough. That's currently looking sort of at a high level at both what the scope of the facility might be. You know, there's a debate, for example, about whether it would be a sort of a natural swim type facility versus a bit more of a sort of more built and purpose designed sort of Lido facility, and similarly where it might go in the borough. So you know, we're looking at options for locations. There's quite a lot of analysis that will need to be brought together to consider all of those aspects. Clearly, you know, a major, much like the Gurnell project, we want the scheme to be both kind of in climate change terms sustainable, but also sustainable financially. So we need to sort of consider and take advice on sort of revenue implications of running a facility like this. So all of that's being sort of crunched through a feasibility study, and will be taken back to initially to senior colleagues and then cabinet for consultation. We'd expect a cabinet report to again to come forward at some point in the future to again set out more detail on those plans and how we expect to deliver that scheme. So I hope that's a helpful summary of those three projects, and this is the last slide, which is just a reminder of the future three meetings that this panel is going to be looking at. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think that was a really detailed presentation, I think, with all the extra slides as well. So thank you to Peter and Adam for putting that together. I think it was really beneficial. So I think it's an opportunity now to go to questions. I know Councillor Summers has already indicated he wants to pass on. So do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just a couple of questions on to Adam and probably Chris about. One is about Gurnell. Obviously, the decision was made at the cabinet in February to go ahead and also to demolish the building. I keep going past it and it's still there. I was just wondering, you know, presumably you have to tender to a demolition contractor or whatever. I just wondered if you could update us on that. And the Lido project sounds exciting. I mean, I represent Northolt, which has got a leisure centre. Then you've got Gurnell. So you would have thought, sort of Ealing Southall would be the sort of potentially a place where maybe there is more of a need, or more. I just wondered if you got that as far as sort of thinking locations, because obviously it can be a bit confusing when it says, you know, in Ealing, but obviously that's the borough of Ealing, not the place of Ealing.
Happy to answer that. If I go first with the Gurnell question, I might look to Chris to answer the Lido one. But you're absolutely right, Councillor. Yes, the demolition of Gurnell is still very much something we're taking forward. I'm aware from the overview and scrutiny discussion that was had on the cabinet report that it is costing money to maintain a building that's currently you know, sort of boarded up, and it's sort of it is a liability and you're sort of in posing the question, you've half sort of anticipate probably what I'm going to say, which is that the process of demolition. So the short answer is yes, we are very much progressing with demolition. We have I mentioned in my talking to that slide that the consultant team that we've engaged includes the management and procurement of a demolition contractor to carry out the works. And I'm sure, much like yourself and many people, you know, just really want to progress and get on with that. Really, the time requirements before the bulldozers get there, so to speak, is around initially designing the demolition scheme itself. It needs to be sort of worked through in terms of how the building's going to be brought down, and then there will need to be, as you say, as you sort of picked up, a tender process undertaken to appoint a demolition contractor, and then there will also need to be sort of soft strip of the building and asbestos removal and things like that. So We are, funny enough, I've just had a conversation today to try and get the latest programme on when they expect to actually be able to bring the building down. And I think it's probably going to be towards the end of the year before all of that activity's completed. But again, so hopefully that answers your question. I'll look to Chris on the Lido.
Thank you. Slightly premature. We're about 4 weeks from the end of the feasibility study. What we've done, we've started with a borough-wide search and came up with an extensive long list of potential sites. Then we've created a matrix to be able to assess each site against the various elements of the matrix, about 10 or 11, covering inclusivity, sustainability, economics, etc., suitability, deliverability. So, and we're, I think, close to coming down to a final 3 for another round of further assessment to try and hone in on the optimal site in the borough. And we've done that with a lens on not looking at the usual suspects in terms of where it could go to actually create a new destination and attraction for the borough.
Thank you. Councillor Najjar.
Thanks. That was really interesting. Thank you. And good to hear about Gurnell. Obviously 3 really exciting big projects. Be keen to hear an idea of time frame as well for Percival House for the refurbishment. And also a question to Peter, if I may. Slide 5, the pie chart. So just be keen to hear what would help, to get the targets from amber to green. Some sort of more detail on that, but also a question more broadly on the ability of the council to sort of deliver on its ambitious housing targets, given the the current economic climate that we're in, rising cost of borrowing. Is there mitigation in place to reduce sort of the risk of partners going bust, but also how will the increases in interest rates impact on the delivery of our homes? Just to have some insight on that would be great. Thanks.
So I'll pick up the question about Percival House refurbishment first. So I think, as I said on the slide deck, it's difficult to say today when we think the refurbishment will happen, but I think we can say when we think we'll be able to give more information on that. And I'll explain a bit more about why that's the case. But as I've said, we're hoping it should be feasible to bring a cabinet report sort of towards the autumn time of this year, which will contain a business case, as I see it within it, which will set out the timeline for the project. So the next stage. So as I see it, there will be a request of cabinet to approve a sort of project plan and a timeline that will set out that how and when we intend to refurbish the building. I think the reason it's difficult to give more today is, as I've sort of alluded to, in the various kind of variables in the project that need to still be kind of established. And so I talked about, for example, the option of how much, or work out how much space we need in the building, for example. That we sort of need to decide that, and the scope of the works, and what kind of the requirements are to meet staff needs to be able to build a sort of construction scope and program around that. So we're very much at that sort of discovery phase of the project, I suppose. So, as I say, I don't think it'll be, particularly long before we are able to give a much more definitive timeline, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're working through at the moment.
Pie charts and the housing question. So I think on the pie chart, what this is showing is the ambers are items that we are expecting to deliver in the coming months. So I think we were using red, the council was using red to be like completely off track or like not gonna get delivered. But these ones are all ones that have kind of typically made a start, were in progress, but we're just not able to have concluded within the 22-23 year. I think to answer the question more broadly, we do have some vacancies in some key roles, and I've made it, as I kind of mentioned, a priority to be getting some of those key leadership roles filled within the directorate, because I think until we get those key people in place, we are always going to be hard pressed to be able to deliver the ambitious agenda. So that's like the bigger picture point, is just getting the right people into those key posts. In terms of kind of how we're going to deliver the housing target, so we're looking at it in the following ways. So firstly, one of the first questions we've got to answer is where are we going to be able to deliver these 4,000 generally affordable homes? So we're moving ahead with that piece of work in terms of identifying the land. Members would have been seen the local plan, draft Reg 18, which included, I think at that stage, over 100 red line site allocations. So there's quite a lot of land identified there, but we're now in the process of, in addition to that, looking at what more can be achieved within the council's land in order to achieve that particular target. So there's a bit around where. There's a bit around, do we have the right people in place? And we're in the process of completing the skills audit to answer that question. Then another element to this is, how are we going to deliver the homes? And there's a piece of work underway that we're calling our affordable housing delivery plan, that its purpose is to answer that question. So it will be looking at a balance between kind of direct delivery, so where the council's directly paying for council homes. It will need to consider the role of Broadway Living in the council's delivery armory. But it will also think about the role of developers and housing associations as well, because as I said earlier, it's a hostile environment out there at the moment. So the council has to think quite carefully about the extent to which we want to take on the risk of investing in delivering homes on lots of sites. You know, we've got sites that we're already going ahead with in terms of council delivery, but we do need to strike a balance between kind of direct delivery and working with partners. The other issue that we need to be mindful of, which we are, is because of a combination of factors, including high interest rates and inflationary pressures, we are starting to observe in the wider marketplace the risk of contractors going into administration. So that's another risk that we're really watching very carefully, and that would particularly impact the council where it is doing direct delivery. So we're looking at this strategy. I think we're going to end up in a place where we'll be having to pursue more partnership opportunities alongside direct delivery, alongside working with housing associations, alongside making sure that we've got the right planning policies in place to continue to be an attractive environment for third parties to invest.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions or anything you want to come back on at all?
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, yeah, I guess that was sort of what I was alluding to as well. What you mentioned there, given the recent difficulties that we've seen in Ealing with developers, and sort of was interested to know what the implications of this would be on, you know, if this has been taken into consideration. with the strategic plan, but it is, I suppose, not something that you can foresee. But given the current climate and what we've seen recently, I think it is quite an important point to consider.
Yes, I mean, I think with developers in particular, one of their big struggles, in addition to the interest rates and the inflationary pressures, is all of the major developers will have a number of schemes that they're having to take back through planning because of double staircasing issues. And because there's no public subsidy to pay for that, and I'm not saying there should be, but that is therefore sometimes either coming at a cost to developers, or they're having to think about the scale and quantum of development in order to offset the cost of having to design and build those additional staircases. So that is something that's happening in the wider marketplace, but it is something that is going to be happening within this borough in particular, well, not in particular, but this borough too, where we will have developers coming back through the planning system with trying to respond to the fact that they're having to take on the second staircases. On contractors in particular, in terms of what we can do and what we are doing is kind of via the council's corporate procurement team, taking a kind of a strategic overview of contractor performance. So looking at the contractors that the council's got on our contract register, and making sure that we've got up-to-date information with regards to their financial viability, for example, making sure that we've got the right contract management relationships in place, so that we'll get an early warning and information about pressures that those contractors might be faced with. But the advice that I've been given is that the instability within the contractor market is something that's likely to be a feature for at least the balance of the year. I'm conscious I'm painting the bleak picture, and I apologize for that, but it's just the kind of the situation that we're in with the housing market at the moment.
I think, Chris, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to revisit slide 5 in terms of the deliverables as well. And it's important to take that broad overview, but I'm picking out the one that's amber under numerics, which is let's go south, or let's ride south. And I think each deliverable has its own narrative and its own background, and it's not for want of effort. And there are a number of dependencies upon that. Let's Ride Southall is a new program, a new initiative. It's not been done before in London. It's the largest cycling program in London. So this is all about scale. And there's a lead-in time of a year on bikes of that magnitude as well. And actually, you'd think it was very easy to give away bikes, but actually, in order to give away bikes and have a meaningful relationship with the recipient that lasts, so the bike doesn't end up in the shed or on eBay, we're working through a program where they get training on how to cycle, training on basic maintenance, and then a commitment to join the social movement as well. So rather than just giving away 1,000 bikes, we're actually going through quite an intense program to get them to value their bike and to use it for the long term.
Thank you. Peter, I just want to come back on just a couple of things that you were saying, just in terms of some additional questions. It was about, you mentioned about council lands and sort of doing an audit of that. So a potential site, in addition to sort of sites that have been identified in the local plan, would these be potentially new sites that development could take place on? And my second question was just about sort of the mix of the genuinely affordable homes, and how is there a sort of strategic view in terms of, because affordable homes can mean a number of different things in terms of how within the overall target, are you working towards a certain percentage needs to meet, needs to be X type, etc., or does that just come down to then when each development comes forward? And the final one was about, you said that we may need to review planning policy in terms of trying to make this more attractive to developers, etc. I was just wondering what sort of changes you think would help with that.
Thank you. Might take them in reverse if that's okay. So I think with what I was meaning with the planning, it wasn't so much policy. So at the moment, Ealing has been a consistent top quartile performer in terms of the speed at which it administers planning applications. And before I joined the council, whilst I was going through the recruitment process, I spoke to a number of people in the industry about perceptions of Ealing's planning authority. And it was really positive. So currently developers view the service they get from Ealing planners to be positive. They also have a positive experience of the Ealing Planning Committee. And that is contrasted with other councils where they find that firstly, the planners aren't proactive. Secondly, they find it impossible to have a meeting in real life with planners. So what we've actually said in Ealing is for all large schemes, there's a presumption in favour of real life meetings because, you know, planning is a complex art that is best done collaboratively in real life. But also some of the other councils in London, they have very unpredictable planning committees. The number one thing that a developer looks for is a level of certainty. We have that in Ealing. That makes it a favourable place to invest. So what I was meaning is we have a good reputation. The extent to which we can build on that reputation with our planning authority and with the quality of service from the planners will continue to make Ealing a one of the best places in London and beyond to invest and do business. On the mix of generally affordable homes, so we are doing a bit of work on this. The current definition really puts the focus and the preference on increasing levels of social housing. The view that we have is that in large parts of the borough, shared ownership homes do not necessarily comply with the definition of generally affordable homes. So in terms of the exact tenures that meets that definition may vary in different wards, because obviously property prices vary from ward to ward, but social housing will always meet the definition, and intermediate tenures such as shared ownership will have to take into account the property values in that particular ward. Hopefully that answers that question. Then in terms of kind of new sites in addition to the local plan, so the local plan I think emphasizes not just sites we own, but sites that are held in third parties' hands. So when we look at identifying new sites, they may be in addition to a local plan, but we expect them to be sites that already have a housing designation. So they're already sites that are suitable for housing, rather than sites where you're going to have to change the designation in order to make them appropriate for housing, because we can only really do that via that local plan process.
Thank you. I know Councillor Mid has had her hand up for a while, so we'll go online and then we'll come to you, Councillor Nagpal.
Thank you, Chair. My question is that because I'm really pleased to know that they are going to open a gym for the ladies in Dorman's Wells Layer Center. So when they are going to open it, I'm so excited. I want to join it before I get old.
It opened at
The
least
gym.
at least 6 months ago, councillor. I would love to take. I'd love to give you a tour.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you.
When you've got off one of our bikes.
I started biking before, before the Cobra, the first lady. I was start cycling.
It's true to say, Chris, it's been a real success, hasn't it?
And it's one of the strongest performing sites in the Everyone Active portfolio. So really positive and a very good indication as to the need and why we replaced it.
Great, thank you. Councillor Nagpal.
Thank you and congratulations on your new post. So I'm asking a question on a slide that you haven't actually addressed in your presentation. It's page 33, the 2030 net zero ambition. I'd just like a bit more information on how they're intending to achieve that.
So I think in relation to net zero, so our council has a ambition to both get the council to net zero by 2030, but also the borough to net zero by 2030. So that's a really galvanizing set of targets we have there. So I've mentioned already that the fact that we've got a single point of leadership and coordination now in terms of how we're going to organise the council's activity. The reality with kind of hitting that agenda is there are things that the council can do directly. There are things that are really going to be the responsibility of residents, but there's also going to be areas where the council is going to require investment from government in order to achieve the target. So the recent report that we took to cabinet on updating cabinet on the climate change strategy included a recommendation that Councillor Costigan writes to the Secretary of State, setting out where the administration feels that further investment is required. So a good example of that investment question is on the retrofit of homes. So in the current year, the council's is planning and is targeting the retrofit of 750 homes. But members will appreciate that that number of homes sits within a context of something around 130,000 homes. So clearly the council alone will not have the funds available or the means, because they're not our properties, to carry out a retrofit to that scale. So that report talks to the fact that part of the ask is going to be around seeking government-led investment on retrofits. So that's the first point. The second point is in terms of the role of all of the residents and citizens within the borough. mean, I think that the first thing to note actually is I was both surprised and disappointed by this, but the representations to the local plan included on the subject of climate change, included equal part positive, equal part climate change deniers. So there is actually a large proportion of the residents who potentially don't even recognise that a climate crisis exists, and without steps by residents to, for example, reduce car usage, other than electric vehicles, and to increase recycling, because the target can't be met. The strategy is clear about the 5 themes. One of them is travel. One of them is waste. One of them is nature. And there's a lot that Chris's team are doing in terms of accelerating the tree planting and bringing forward 10 new parks. But I think the other part is, there's a role for the council to really lead by example here. The council, I think, is begun to do that with the decision to retain and refurbish Percival House rather than to demolish it. The cabinet report noted that for all future planning applications, we will, as of that cabinet report, so already live, we're now expecting developers where they're proposing to demolish to demonstrate first that demolition is absolutely required. So we've adopted a retrofit first policy within our planning system. But what we've said second to retrofit, where it can be proven that not that all or only or part of the building has to be demolished, we're saying as a second stage, you should be reusing materials. It's something that we will be thinking about with, for example, Gurnell. We talk about demolition. Actually, what we're going to be investigating is deconstruction. The difference being, one would enable, the deconstruction would enable the potential salvage of materials. We're thinking about that with Percival House. There was furniture here, which is, if we can't use it, how can it be upcycled and used elsewhere? So there's a role for the council to lead by example. I've spoken about how we'll be doing it through the planning system, but if we're not leading by example, then we can't reasonably expect the residents in the borough to be making the changes to their lives that we need to happen in order for us to hit the target.
If I could ask a follow-on question, that's this sort of wish list. It sounds like the Councillor Costigan's going to go to the government and say, "Can I add one more to it?" I've been researching and writing today about this e-bikes and the terrible fire in Cambridge the other day. London Fire Brigade say there have been 82 fires involving e-bikes this year, and it's the biggest sort of fire risk. I wondered, whether are we planning to sort of ban people from keeping their e-bikes within a block of flats, council-owned flats, because of the fire risk? And secondly, in New York, the federal government have given New York $25 million to put in charging points for electric bikes. So I don't know whether, across London, the mayor or all the London councils could go to the government and say, can we do that? But it's a real worry. But also, when it comes to sustainability, obviously, it's quite a good mode of transport to get people around without sort of clogging up the roads.
I mean, I think entirely agree with that final point about, you know, importance of bikes as a mode of transport. And you know, I think the view is that the only way in which we can you know, reduce the amount of polluting cars is by having a combination of electric vehicles, whether they're cars or bikes, as well as regular pedestrian cycles. So thinking about cycle through the planning system, we will be thinking about identifying active travel routes across the borough. I think in terms of e-bikes and banning them, I've not heard any discussion about the council contemplating banning e-bikes, but the point about you know, the risk around fire is clearly a serious one that will be investigated by our kind of health and safety people.
Thank you. Councillor Nagpal, do you have any follow-up on any of that? I just had 2 points just quickly on this area. One was about sort of, you mentioned about the response to local plan, that sort of 50% of the response in the environment section was sort of, you know, not in a, you know, climate change deniers or however you want to sort of phrase it. I guess whether that's it enables us to reflect on sort of the comms around sort of these issues, and not just necessarily from a climate perspective, but actually as a cost perspective. You know, if you're talking about heat, you know, the biggest chunk here is domestic heating. Actually, if you retrofit your home, if you do all these things, that's going to save you money. It's not just about the environment. I just wonder whether there's a piece of communication that can be done. You know, if there is, you know, such a large contingent of people who don't necessarily view this through the prism of net zero, is there other ways of communicating in order to bring people along the journey with you, and maybe actually how in the long term it can save you money? Maybe, you know, especially now with the high energy prices, that may be another way of trying to do that. I guess the other thing you mentioned in terms of getting people out of their cars, you talked about sort of cycling, electric cars, etc. But I guess the other thing is public transport. So buses, trains, you know, not everyone can get on a bicycle, you know, especially more elderly, you know, residents, for example, possibly are much more reliant on buses. What are we doing in terms of trying to, you know, do we have, you know, is there a scheme of work? I know a lot of it is down to Transport for London, but looking at how buses are sort of flowing through the borough, other ways of improving links to different bits of the borough, and actually how, you know, it's great we've got all these cycle lanes, but with narrowing the roads, how does that impact these big double-decker buses going along those routes? Is that impeding their journeys? Is that affecting, you know, potentially the desire of people sometimes to get a bus? I just wonder whether how public transport fits in.
Sure. I mean, I think firstly, I don't recognise the description of Ealing as having loads of cycle lanes. I've made a point of really getting to know the borough on foot and on bike, and now up to 110 kilometres walking and cycling around the borough. And it's not been my experience that we've got loads of cycle lanes. And I say that, you know, I live in North London, so I cycle through North, East, Central quite a lot. And compared to boroughs like Hackney and Waltham Forest, we really don't have many cycle lanes. I think on the point about public transport, I think in terms of the hierarchy of kind of travel, I think our preference will always be active travel first. So we would always promote pedestrian and cyclists, because it's not just from the environmental perspective, but also from a public health perspective. So I think we would always kind of prioritize through planning and through our projects, those modes of transport first. I think secondly, on public transport, I think firstly, you know, one of the reasons for the level of growth that this borough has seen over the last 5 to 10 years is due to the quality of public transport infrastructure, and of course, in particular, the advent of the Elizabeth line. So we have really good public transport, particularly tube and train, and members will note that growth is really springing up, sort of starting to spring up adjacent to those crossrail stations. In terms of kind of what more we can do to promote buses, so it is as part of all of larger planning applications and schemes, they will all have to submit a transport strategy, and crucially, where the schemes put pressure on existing public transport provision, they will also have to make financial contributions via Section 106 to improve the quality of the infrastructure. So I think it will be through the developments that will be able to use finance via 106 to improve that infrastructure, as well as the work that the council is doing on its own regeneration schemes, where active travel and public transport will be our priority focuses in terms of transport. In terms of the climate change point and comms, that whole messaging bit is being looked at by the Climate Leadership Board. So that is something that we are investigating to see how the message around the climate crisis can be presented in terms that encourages people to think differently about their lifestyles.
Thank you. Any other questions? Someone online? No, I didn't ask that. I just had one other thing on the job, the 10,000 new jobs. It was just really how do we find a quality job? What does that actually mean? And in terms of, I think on one of the slides, what slide number is now, it talks about apprenticeships, etc. But I just want to clarify, those are separate to that 10,000 total. It's not part of it.
I'll let Connor answer if he's able.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, so essentially the definition of a good job is a job that can support an individual or a family to live in Ealing comfortably and have a good life. They can afford their rent, or they can afford to live, they can travel to a job sustainably, and they can earn enough money just to lead a good life. It's not about jobs that, encourage or entrench in work poverty, which we do see it quite a lot across London at the moment. And in fact, probably worthwhile sharing a stat that out of most London boroughs, there's quite a lot of in-work poverty in Ealing at the moment. So that's a big challenge for all of us to work on addressing. And that's probably partly the reason why we've been set such a very ambitious target of 10,000 new good jobs during this current administration. It really is a big shift from previous administrations, which were probably a bit more focused on housing delivery. But now we're sort of rebalancing that. Ealing's economy is quite fragile. And I think the impact of COVID-19 on our over-reliance on Heathrow Airport, for example, and all its supply chain networks did expose us a little. We were the second most furloughed borough in the UK or in England. So it's about having a much stronger focus on rebuilding a more dynamic, more inclusive, more sustainable local economy to go alongside all the infrastructure, all the new homes that have been discussed already as well. In terms of the apprenticeships, yes, that's a separate target. So we've got a few different targets. We've got the 10,000 new jobs. We've also got the apprenticeship target, and then we've got some targets around, focusing on our most hardest hit residents, or those residents that have been very far away from the labour market with significant barriers to achieving that. So I guess on that point, what we're really trying to achieve here in supporting Ealing residents is really focusing our resources on those that really need it as well. So it's a really important metric as well to mention about those facing the toughest barriers to getting into work. And it's, in terms of delivering this, it's a broad mix of different things. We've got a number of things in-house that we're delivering within the Economic Growth Service, which I lead. We've got 2 teams, one known as Learn Ealing, which is delivering all the skills and training we want to give Ealing residents. And we've also got Work Ealing, which is mainly acting as a brokerage service to ensure Ealing residents can benefit from new jobs that's coming through the growth pipeline. Ealing is a growth borough. We've got 2 of the largest regeneration zones in London, in Southall and in the area around Old Oak and Park Royal. So there's lots of job opportunities coming through. We just need to make sure that they're actually getting to the residents, and that's the same for apprenticeships as well.
Thank you. So it's not a salary of a certain. So it's not a X thousand makes it a sort of quality job, because from what you're saying, obviously that depends on the person. If they're supporting one person or a family, that value may be very, very different. So there isn't a sort of an arbitrary salary that makes something classed as a quality job or within a certain sector.
Well, it will have to be above the London living wage,
Right.
of course.
Yes. So I mentioned that. Yes, that's the very minimum, above the London living wage. But even that, in the data and research we've been carrying out recently, even that's not enough. As I think, as Peter alluded to earlier, there's a bit of a crisis in the housing market, which is driving up rents and the cost of living, and wages just aren't keeping up. So we have to work that extra bit harder to ensure that these jobs are good quality jobs. You may have heard of a term called the knowledge economy. So within the knowledge economy, you would get those higher salaries. And again, along the Uxbridge Road corridor in particular, we have quite a few knowledge economy jobs. We're also seeing quite a few knowledge economy jobs potentially coming through the creative enterprise zone. I think the creative enterprise zone is potentially quite a transformational step change for that part of Ealing, which we'd like to see, filtrated through the rest of the borough. So there's some very positive signs coming through at the moment, but still a very ambitious target we have to achieve. So we have to try literally everything we can to get there, and we're working in partnership with a number of suppliers and developers and businesses as well to help us achieve it.
Thank you. And just on that creative enterprise zone, what does that mean in terms of the levers the council has within that zone in order to try and grow the businesses that are coming there? What extra advantages are there from being designated that particular, having given that designation?
Yeah, I think there's a few different levers. One of the biggest levers is it's helping us create more exposure to that part of Ealing and that part of London in many ways, and that has helped a large group of local businesses, local creatives, local artists, digital businesses to really come together under a single banner, and by doing that, they've got a much stronger voice together, and that's already helping them leverage investment and income into that particular area to support their businesses. So one example of that is a recent program that we developed in collaboration with the GLA and OPDC to invest a few £100,000 of revenue and some capital as well to support some of those businesses to invest in equipment and to grow their workforce as well. So that's creating more jobs for that area, as we go along. Another thing as well is it really helps us as a council and builds credibility for us as a council as well when we're speaking on the national stage across the UK. when we're describing Ealing as a place to invest in, we can say we're one of the very few boroughs or very few authorities in the whole of the UK that has a creative enterprise zone. And as soon as you say that, you've got the attention of the investor already, and they're very interested. Okay, I want to know more about that. I want to come to Ealing, potentially invest and grow a business. So it's more soft power as opposed to hard power. There's no real policy definition around it. For example, in a local plan, there won't be a policy saying that if you're in the creative enterprise zone, you must do X, Y, and Z. It's more sort of soft power. Although there is something that the local plan will pick up, which the creative enterprise zone in many ways helped seed, is the creation of an affordable workspace policy. So you may be familiar that we've got affordable housing policies, which have been around for a very long time, but we're now going to be bringing forward an affordable workspace policy as well within Ealing, because we're seeing that a lot of workspace is also quite expensive, and we want to ensure that particularly those smaller businesses, those micro businesses, those startups, those entrepreneurs have the space within Ealing as well that's affordable for them to operate and grow a business, as we can keep Ealing a very sustainable place, so for living in and also working in.
Great, thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of questions. So I just want to thank Peter, Adam, Connor, Philip, and Chris for coming along this evening in person and virtually and doing the presentation. I think we all found that really valuable. So thank you very much. So I guess this takes us back to the work program that we spoke about at the start. So the next meeting, which is going to be in October, was going to focus on housing delivery. We had some thoughts about a potential site visit to the Green Quarter in Southall, in terms of looking at sort of how the council's delivery program is working. I don't know if, in terms of what we've heard this evening, are there any particular sort of areas in the housing delivery sort of part that we'd want to maybe focus on or get some more information on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just about home working, factoring in how the modern post-pandemic worker, if they're not coming into the office a couple of days a week, they might be working at home all week. There's a lot that is a real big implication on not just on new properties or housing, but also the economy, because you used to have thousands of millions of people would commute into central London or even into Ealing or whatever. Nowadays, increasingly, people are staying at home, which means that they often have to sort of pop out to get a snack or get lunch or whatever, and it would just, or they're not buying their lunch in the centre of Ealing, whatever. So it's got big economic impacts. So I just wondered if one of the officers could address that, or whether there's any sort of strategic thinking on that.
Okay, great. We've jotted that down. A suggestion I thought was, I can't remember whether it was Adam or Peter that spoke about it. They mentioned about sort of a planning approach and focusing on investment, and on infrastructure. And I just wonder, often when we hear planning applications or when residents contact us about ones in the ward, the thing that often people are concerned about is infrastructure, and whether that's, there is enough infrastructure for that particular size of development, etc. And maybe a bit more about what that approach is going to entail and how they see that working. How does that link in with Section 106? Because I think there was, I'm not sure we can talk about it because of the goal papers, but about the amount of Section 106 money there is, how all that feeds in together. So I wonder whether that might be an element to talk about at the next meeting as well. Any other suggestions for the second meeting? No. And then the third one, which is going to be in December, on sustainability and climate action. Obviously, we can go back to again in October, but was there anything out of the meeting today that we wanted to sort of explore a bit more? I think it might just be interesting. He did mention, Peter mentioned that the Climate Action Board are looking about how they communicate those messages with residents. And maybe hopefully by December, we'll have a bit more about what's come out of that. So that might be part of it. And also looking at, the other thing I was thinking of as well is looking at what residents can actually do themselves. So, and how that information is accessible, because there's probably a lot that residents can do. And we can't necessarily rely on the council or expect the council to do everything. Maybe a bit more about how, what there is available in terms of residents being able to help on that journey, and how we communicate that maybe as well. Yeah. So we can maybe ask someone from the Climate Board to come as an expert witness, or as to, as part of the presentation. That'd probably be a good idea. I don't think we had any. I don't think we had necessarily any site visits sort of suggested for that particular meeting. But if there are any other suggestions that come forward, we can consider that. And then the final meeting, which is going to be March, which is a long way off, was just on sort of economic growth in general. I don't know if there was anything particularly out of the meeting today that we wanted to sort of jot down for that.
Well, somebody representing North, I'm conscious that certain parts of the borough sort of are away from the sort of the main centres, the main sort of magnets, which is nowadays, especially the Elizabeth line. I don't know whether especially by March, whether we will have seen any sort of movement of sort of companies, relocating, away from the central line to the Elizabeth line, or just, what can be done to improve the economic viability of the north of the borough, especially.
So looking at all sort of the 7 towns and how we keep all of those attractive.
Yeah, even when they were talking about the cultural manifesto, which most of the sort of festivals, jazz festival, etc., are all in Ealing. Would it be possible that we could maybe, trying one of those in Northolt or Southolt? Why do they always have to be in Ealing? I mean, there might be an easier place for people to get to, or people traditionally go to it, but there's no reason why we couldn't try.
That all sounds good. And like I said, we can obviously at future meetings sort of come up, we can hone that in, because March is a long way off from now. Excellent. I think that is everything for this evening. I think in terms of a slight change from previous years, we're supposed to be making recommendations at the end of each of the meetings to rather than wait till the end of the year and a big report. I know what we had said, obviously this was more of an overview, so we didn't necessarily expect any particular recommendations to come out tonight, but hopefully when we're looking at each of those themes individually in the meetings ahead, just if we can just keep that in mind as we, for future meetings, that at each of the end of them, we're going to want to come up with some sort of recommendations. Perfect. Well, yeah, Councillor Powell.
So I think you mentioned at the beginning that we haven't got any co-optees.
Yeah.
In that meeting that we had on Teams, I think you mentioned like an Ealing business group that. Yeah. So I actually thought that was a great idea. So, is it perhaps worth contacting them?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll make contact with them, and actually in March we put that down as potential visits. Maybe visit one of their networking events, etc. Maybe we can hear from businesses locally about what they think the economic barriers are. Ideally, hopefully before the meeting that we do on the 12th, which maybe then could help facilitate some of that discussion. But yeah, I think we're going to plan to do that.
Just to flag, or just to say, for these potential site visits, it would be really useful if they are not conducted during working hours, so that we can all attend. I know in past, not this panel in particular, but it would be very helpful if we can all make them with timings being considered.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think we're going to try if we can. I know when I was one of the panels last year, we did it on a Saturday, the scrutiny, or it was a Sunday, or at weekends. So I think we'll try and do that. I think the business club visit I know they do it during the week, so that particular one might not be possible to do it, you know, on a weekend. But I think, you know, for example, the Green Quarter, and I think also we potentially wanted to visit the enterprise zone that we were talking about. I think those can easily be arranged to be done at a weekend. Yeah. Great. So I think that brings us to the end tonight. Thank you, everyone, and see you all in October.
Okay, good night.